So welcome to this month's StepZen community update. In the community update, I like to highlight some of the new features we've been working on. For this month, I'd like to share with you what we've been adding to the StepZen dashboard, where you can now find a way to measure your API's performance. Also, we've added new capabilities for using StepZen together with Snowflake. And finally, I'd like to highlight some of the examples we have on GitHub, such as our examples repo, but also our repo filled with code snippets, which are very suitable for some of our more experienced StepZen users. So let's start and dive into the StepZen dashboard where we've added new performance capabilities. In the StepZen dashboard, you can now find out the performance of your API just by looking at the global overview page. In here you can find a list of all your deployed endpoints, and as you see, I've got quite some deployed. You can also see the number of queries, the total response time, and then you can also, of course, go to the inbuilt GraphQL to start working with your APIs. On the top, you can see an overview of requests for all your APIs. So this is the sum of requests for all the APIs I have in this list. And then, of course, you can also see the average latency for all these APIs on my list. And you can view this for the last 30 days, but also for the last 7 days in case you want to get a bit fresher data. And then the cool thing is, if we actually press on one of these endpoints, we can start compare it with a previous period. So let me go to my fragments, unions, and interfaces example, which I actually built for a YouTube video. So if you'd like to learn more about using fragments, unions, and interfaces in GraphQL, make sure to find that video per the link in the comments. So if I press these 3 dots, I already were able to copy my URL or go to the Explorer, which is our built-in graphical view, and now you can also find reports. And this shows you a report page for this specific endpoint. And you can actually compare the average latency and the 95p latency for this period, but also for the previous period. And as this endpoint is rather new, there's no comparison to be made. But if you are using StepZen for your projects, you probably have fresher data and actually a bit more data. So you can actually look back previous periods and see how your APIs have been performing. And of course, you can also see the amount of requests in this specific period. So what's next for this page? As you can see, we try to give you as much data which is globally usable, such as latency, 95p latency, and the number of requests. But of course, we want to do better and we want to do more. As GraphQL is a very great query language for your APIs, there's much more we can add, such as a breakdown of specific queries, of query names, and maybe even show you the performance of your underlying endpoints. So if you're connecting to a REST API or a database, at some point we will be able to show you how these underlying data sources are performing. And if you want to have any impact on our roadmap, make sure to leave a comment or send us an email or go to Discord and let us know what type of variables you'd like to see in this report, because that's the only way to make this report better for everyone. So make sure to go to the dashboard and try out the reporting feature for your endpoints. And the second bit we have for this community update is I'll show you how to use StepZen together with the Snowflake warehouse. And for this, we're going to be following the next few steps in the video. So before jumping into code, we need to log into Snowflake to access our warehouse. And you can do this using your username and password, which you created while creating an account for Snowflake. So for me, it will be Roy Dirks test, and then of course the password I chose when creating my account. And you can log in via your own Snowflake URL. So the previous URL you saw, it's your URL to log into Snowflake. And when you first sign up, they'll actually create a couple of tutorials or sample databases for you. And what I will be using today is the tutorial to sample queries, which is this first one. So if you click on it, you will go to a worksheet. And in this worksheet, you can actually try out some of these queries. For example, you could get information on customers, including a lot of different variables. And if you're looking at the query language they're using, it's pretty much like SQL. So once you're logged into Snowflake, meaning you've set up a Snowflake account and you're using one of the pre-filled databases that they've set up for testing purposes, we can actually use the credentials of our Snowflake account to generate our GraphQL API. And for this, we need to collect a set of information. Something I dislike about Snowflake, it's a great tool for having a big data solution, for having a large data warehouse, but they made it pretty hard to find all the credentials you need in order to connect to this database from the outside world. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to be connecting our Snowflake user ID, or actually how they call it, it's called the account identifier. And you're going to need this in order to connect to the database from the outside world. So you need your account identifier, and then we also go to data and databases, and here we can actually find our database name, which is Snowflake sample data, and then we can select any of these schemas. And the SF100 or SF10, it shows you how much data is actually inside there. So let's go for SF100 TCL. So this will be your database name, Snowflake underscore sample underscore data, and then our database schema would be this identifier. So make sure to copy this. So we're going to be using this in a little bit to start creating our GraphQL API based on this Snowflake database. And then the final thing you need, and you can find this under admin and warehouses, is your actual warehouse, which is called compute underscore WH. So with these set of identifiers, so our account identifier or database name or database schema, and then the name for warehouse, together with the username and password you created during setup, we're able to generate a GraphQL API based on the contents of our database. And for this, we're going to head over to the StepZen dashboard. On the StepZen dashboard, there's a section called Getting Started. And from here, you can basically create a GraphQL API just by following the prompts you'd see in your screen. So independently from our CLI, you can also follow the same steps in the dashboard, and then we generate a CLI command for you that you can bring over to VS Code or wherever you have your terminal running. So where's your data coming from? For this, we're going to be selecting Snowflake, and we need a couple of identifiers as we previously walked through. So we're going to need our account identifier, which you can find in the Snowflake dashboard by going to your name down below here, and then you can copy the identifier. And next to this, we also need a username and password. So these are the username and password that you created during setup that you also used to log into the dashboard for Snowflake. And then of course you need your database name, your database schema, and the name of the warehouse. Our database is called Snowflake underscore sample data. And then we want to use this schema, which is the SF100. Just copy this part, so our database name, and then we add our database schema. And then finally, we need the name of our warehouse, which we can also find right here in our Snowflake dashboard. As I told you in the beginning, there are quite some identifiers that we need to collect, but as soon as you have these identifiers, you can get started and set up StepZen in order to work together with your Snowflake warehouse and generate a GraphQL API for its contents. And of course, it needs the database name, the database schema, and then of course a way to connect to it, which is your username and password. So for the next step, the dashboard asks you to install the StepZen CLI, which you can install from npm, and then you need to log in with your StepZen account and enter your admin key when prompted. And to enter these credentials, we're heading over to a VS Code project where I have an integrated terminal. In VS Code, I've set up a new directory called Getting Started Snowflake, and in here I need to install the StepZen CLI, which I've already done, and then the second step is to log in using your username and admin key. Once you're successfully logged in, you can go back to the dashboard and take the second step. So in the dashboard, you can just press next step and you will get 3 new commands. The first one is initialize your project. So this will create the StepZen configuration file. The second one is to actually import your backend. So this is the Snowflake database from a warehouse compute underscore WH. And then finally, we can type StepZen start, which will deploy the generated GraphQL schema over to StepZen's cloud, meaning as soon as it's deployed, we can start using this endpoint to get data using GraphQL. So let me copy paste these commands. The first one is StepZen init and go back to VS Code. In VS Code, I can just copy this here and it generates a StepZen configuration file with the name of my endpoint. Then the second command is actually much more important. It's the command to import the Snowflake database and generate the GraphQL schema based on its contents. In VS Code, I can just copy paste this in my terminal, after which StepZen will start to send an introspection query. And then the second command I need to copy paste is the command to actually generate my GraphQL API. And I already see there's a small typo in my DB password, but I'll make sure to change this as soon as this video is over, so you won't be able to copy my database. Let's do this. And now StepZen starts to introspect the Snowflake database and then generates a GraphQL schema based on whatever is in there. And if you look on the right, you can see we actually have a GraphQL schema generated with a lot of different variables and a lot of data in it. Actually, if you look in here, you can see different types of queries. You can see queries that use a more declarative approach where you're only taking the schema and the table. And you can also see sort of raw SQL queries in there. So these are a little bit more complicated. For example, when we want to have pagination, meaning that there should be some sort of filter anywhere in a query. As you can see, we try to limit and add an offset to the variables directly in this query there. So two sorts of flavors. It doesn't really matter which one you use, because in both, StepZen will make sure that the connection to Snowflake is optimal and efficient. So to deploy the schema, we just need to run StepZen start. And, oh, small typo there. We need to run StepZen start, and this will take your GraphQL schema, deploy it to StepZen's cloud, and make it available to query directly from the StepZen dashboard. If you look on your terminal, you can actually see we have a set of endpoints. We have a curl command that we could already try from our terminal. And we also have a link to the StepZen dashboard. But we're not going to follow this link. Instead, we just press next step, and we have the StepZen dashboard actually check whatever we have deployed here, and we can also see it's running. And then there's two other steps we can take. We can either track performance of the GraphQL API by looking at the API analytics, or we can start exploring using the built-in GraphQL, which is probably the easiest way, because as you look here, what already happened is StepZen generated a example query for you. So we can just run this query. It should work as expected. We can also try a bit more complicated query instead. So let's actually head back to our GraphQL schema and see if we can find out what type of queries we'd like to use. So let's get back to the example that we saw in the beginning. We have a call center list that we can query like this. We can use a query called call center list and see what kind of variables we have for it. We can get the city. We can get, so we have country. Actually do zip first. So cc zip and then cc underscore country. So this will get a sample list of data from some call center. As you can see, it has cities, zip codes, and also the country. And if we look back at the GraphQL schema, we saw that this one was done completely declaratively. You didn't even have to give up the SQL query in your GraphQL schema, because StepZen is able to get this data out of your database using the declarative approach. But if we look at our GraphQL schema, you can see we also have queries that have a raw SQL query in it. or actually a Snowflake query, which is pretty similar to SQL. And if we will use this one, so this one is taking pagination, we can actually try and do the same approach. So let's head back to the dashboard and try the query called call_center paginated list. We probably don't have to do much more. We can just add another underscore, or like this actually, paginated list. It takes two variables. It takes after, so we can probably do 1 there, after number 1, or maybe try 0. And then we want to see the first 5 results, because, well, from the default one, we probably got like 20. First, I want to have the first 5. Let me run this. After 0, we actually have a small error there as we typed something incorrectly. Let me see, after 1 maybe. Oh, we need to close it with a parenthesis. That's pretty cool. You can actually run this prettifier here, which would already check if we have any errors in our GraphQL query. And then we run it again. We should be getting the first 5 results. So this all works, and it's using a slightly different way, as it doesn't declaratively take the data out of the database. Instead, you have to define a raw SQL query. But when using StepZen, you don't even have to write these queries yourself, because when StepZen is introspecting your schema, it will already generate these raw SQL statements for you whenever it's needed. And of course, there's much more you can do. So I advise you to read our blog post on using StepZen with Snowflake and try it out yourself. Both StepZen and Snowflake have free ways of using the product. So make sure to take advantage of that. Then the third and final thing I'd like to show you are 2 repos we have on the StepZen GitHub page. The first one is called examples. And in here you can find all sorts of examples to use StepZen together with different technologies. You could find, for example, examples with Auth0, CockroachDB, FaunaDB, Firebase, Gatsby. Even the Snowflake example that I just showed you is right here in this examples repo. It's a slightly different version, as the one I just showed you was actually created just now, but you can find all these examples in this repo. And actually, you can start contributing to this list. So if you're building something with StepZen and some other cool DevTool product, make sure to create a pull request in this repo and add the new example. If you'd like to know more around contributing, we have a file in here which is called contributing.markdown, and in here you can find all the steps to actually create a pull request and start adding your own examples to this GitHub repository. So make sure to first fork it and then push any of your changes. And as we said, we are really happy if you do. And we still have some StepZen stickers to give away in case you put any new projects inside our examples repo. And to get an idea, you can also go to issues where we have a small list of things we would like to add you there. For example, what I really like is an example of using StepZen with a Astro web app. And if you haven't heard about Astro, it's a really cool front-end technology to build blazingly fast front-end applications. And then another GitHub repo that I like to highlight is called Snippets. And in the Snippets repo, you can find really advanced code snippets of using StepZen. You could find ways to create a public GraphQL API, to create a public API that has some private routes, or actually to do ABAC protection rules. So you can maybe even look at the permissions someone have, and then based on the permissions display a set of fields. Something else I really like here is the part that says transforms, where you can learn how to use JSONADA or even our transform REST function, which is using JavaScript. So this is all in here. Also some reshapings. So it's really cool to see what you can do with StepZen, especially when you really left the getting started experience and you're ready to build more complex GraphQL APIs. So make sure to check out this repo as well. I don't think we take public pull requests for this repo, but if you've got cool examples, make sure to add them either to the examples repo or the snippets repo. And as I told you, we have some stickers to give away for people that actually do this. So make sure that once you have this example, either create the pull request or reach out to us on Discord, because it's the best place to reach the StepZen team if you're a developer and looking to join a cool GraphQL community. So thank you all for joining this month's community update. I've showed you the new feature we have on the dashboard to help you with reporting for measuring performance on your GraphQL endpoints. We looked at an example of using StepZen together with Snowflake. And finally, I showed you ways to contribute to StepZen by adding examples to our GitHub repo. And I cannot emphasize this enough, but we're really happy with all the developers using our product. And if you're one of those developers, make sure to start contributing to us by adding more examples or joining our Discord server and engage with the community. So thank you, and I hope